Similar to KU greats Cole Aldrich and Udoka Azubuike, Flory Bidunga is set up for a huge jump in year two as a sophomore for Kansas, and boy, do the Jayhawks need it.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're talking Flory Bidunga, why he's set up for a big jump in his sophomore season, similar to past Bill Self big men. We'll also get into a little bit of who else needs to take a big jump from their level of play from a previous season for Kansas to be successful this year. Certainly they need it from Flory as well. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So Flory Bidunga had I would say, successful first season at Kansas. I mean, obviously, in being behind Hunter Dickinson, like, it's going to limit the amount of minutes and your playing time that you end up with. But overall, in year one as a freshman, 16 minutes per game, 6 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1.6 blocks, 0.6 steals on 69.8% from the floor. And there were moments where, there were a couple games this year where I thought Flory Bidunga was KU's best player on the floor. There were moments where he looked like KU's most talented player, which he probably was the most talented on last year's team. There were other moments where he was raw. There were other moments where, it was like, okay, I can understand why he is coming off the bench, right? But some of those moments that were really good were really high and were really fun to watch. Like, you think of the Houston game that Kansas eventually lost in double overtime, but he was amazing. You think of the UCF game, the one in Orlando where he has the ridiculous steal and take it the other way and dunk it down. He is a special prospect and player that Kansas has playing the center position. And so now in year two, Hunter Dickinson graduates. There are more minutes to be had. KJ Adams is gone. He is one of the veterans on the team. He is a veteran presence at the big man spot. And KU only has two other big men on the roster. Both are freshmen. Bryson Tiller redshirted, but he was injured. It's not like he was practicing through the red shirt. And Paul Mbia is a true freshman for Kansas. So there's a lot on Flory Bidunga to improve from where he was. Now, if we just get what he was last season, but in a bigger sample size, in a, just bigger usage capacity, that's still going to be a really effective player for KU. But obviously Kansas is hoping he takes a jump in addition to that kind of usage going up as well. And I think he can and will, because he is somebody who he seems to work really hard. Like, that's always been the story around him, that he's been somebody who does work really hard. He is a little bit more raw to the game of basketball, which tells you there is more potential there. There's more to be taught, so to speak. And so I look back to a couple Bill Self big men who really had big jumps from their freshman to sophomore seasons, specifically guys who were like McDonald's All-Americans, which is the case of Flory, because that matches up with, okay, you came in with this high potential. Now, there'd be other players too, like the list of Bill Self players in general, not just big men, but that improve from one season to the next or have a breakout season at some point in their career, is obviously very long. And if we are just talking big men, like, the Morris twins, or Jeff Withey, or Thomas Robinson from his sophomore to junior year, like Landon Lucas from his sophomore to junior year. There are players, they're big men. And again, there's guards who did it too, who are guys that take big leaps. Wayne Selden, from his sophomore to junior season. There's so many guys who have, those big jumps, those big leaps from one year to the next with a Bill Self team in the Bill Self program. But it's most pertinent here to look at the guys who did it from freshman to sophomore year, because that is exactly what Flory Bidunga is doing, right? And so Wayne Selden doing it from sophomore to junior year, but also not being a big man, it's not as applicable. So that's where I think Cole Aldrich and Udoka Azubuike really come in as model citizens, so to speak, or examples that you can point to of former All-American big men, high school All-American, McDonald's All-American big men at Kansas, coming in, maybe not playing as many minutes, as big of a role as they were later going to in their career. And then all of a sudden you're vaulted into the starting lineup, if I can speak here, by your second year, and you're asked to do a lot, and you perform and you come through and you're a very productive player and a good player. And in the cases of both those guys, Cole Aldrich and Udoka Azubuike, both of them eventually became first-round draft picks. Both of them eventually became All-Americans at Kansas, right? And the interesting part with Doak is that, his limited capacity in his freshman year, that was mostly injury related. But I guess it technically still counts. And I will say, even though it's funny because Doak started, I think he played like 11 games. He started like 6 or something. But it was still just 13 minutes per game. And Flory Bidunga actually played more minutes per game as a freshman than Udoka Azubuike did, even though Doak was like starting half of the time next to Landon Lucas. When you look at Cole Aldrich, he went from somebody who was playing, single digit minutes per game to all of a sudden he's playing close to 30 minutes per game in 2009. And so, that's the other beauty of this too, is I guess the team comparison, because in both those individual cases, like both of those were all Big 12 players in Udoka Azubuike and Cole Aldrich in their sophomore seasons. And I think that's the expectation here for Flory this year. But you look at the 2009 and the 2018 teams, they were kind of reliant on that center taking a big jump for their team to be able to be successful. Because you look at the 2009 team, and that was all the players from the national championship team. If we're just talking big men, right? You lose Darnell Jackson, Sasha Khan at the center position, Darrell Arthur as a big forward too. Out of necessity, Cole Aldrich had to take on a bigger role. You look at Udoka Azubuike, okay, Landon Lucas graduates, Jamari Traylor graduates, right? Hunter Mickelson graduates. You're going to have to take on that big role. And like that 2018 team, it just kind of similar to this year's team, didn't have a lot of big man depth. Like, who were the big men? It was like a very young Mitch Lightfoot. Was Dwight Colby on that roster? Maybe he was redshirting that year. I don't know. Carlton Bragg was on that roster. Like that one, similar to this one, in that it didn't have a lot of other options. And the Aldridge one, similar to this one, in that it's a guy like kind of being forced into the spotlight, but has shown flashes in his freshman year to make you think he's going to be able to handle it in a positive way. And I think there's some other comparisons too that makes the comparison with Udoka Azubuike and Cole Aldrich very interesting with Flory Bidunga, because I think it's what makes all those players productive, right? I mean, you're talking about, like, I think the comparisons with Flory and Cole Aldrich are, both of them are really good shot blockers. Both of them are good rebounders. Both of them, I don't think have, I think Cole probably has a little bit more on his offensive game than what we've seen from Flory so far, but maybe that develops a little bit more in year 2. But still, even then, like, Cole Aldrich wasn't the Morris twins with his offensive repertoire. And then when you're looking at the Udoka Azubuike, comparison, you end up with a guy who's like, okay, this is a big man who's going to be super efficient by dunking everything around the rim, right? Doak did it more with power. Flory does it with like length and athleticism, but it's the same kind of outcome there. And I think Flory's a better shot blocker than Doak. Doak, again, bigger and had more size and presence and stuff, but again, both good rebounders and both physically imposing in different ways on the other team who's out there. So I think there's a lot of comparisons we can get to, which is why, coming back from the break, we're going to specifically get into the compare and contrast portion for those 3 parties involved to kind of take a look at, I don't know, what could Flory's season look like statistically, and kind of get a little bit more into this possible year 2 jump. That is both something that I'm expecting and would be needed for KU basketball for Flory Bidunga. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy Transfusion, baby. Let's be honest. Some days on the course or off it or in life, you just need that extra boost to stay up, stay sharp, and stay energized. And it's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink minus the alcohol into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this is a hole-in-one for your energy game. You're running out of days before, I don't know, like, the summer months are going to come out. I know we still have, a little bit more of the heat here, but like, couple months from now, before you know it, it's not going to be golfing weather anymore. It's going to turn to, winter weather in like 3 months, which I know that sounds like a while, but it's going to flow by, especially with football, right? Things are going to go so fast. and you want to take advantage of those moments. You don't want to be groggy on the golf course. You probably paid good money to get out on the golf course. So you're just out there to, have fun and get away for a bit. Don't be groggy, wake up. Have a 5-hour energy, baby. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boosts you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-hour energy shots today. That is 5-hour energy. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Okay, so what I find really interesting, if we compare, because again, going into this, like, can Flory take as big of a jump as those guys did? Doak was putting up, 13-7 a game on a team who makes the Final Four in year two. Cole Aldrich is putting up 15-11 in year two. Is that too much to ask? Well, how about we look at their starting points? So if we look at per 40 numbers, which per 40 numbers, take them with a grain of salt. They can be used for something like this. That is good to compare, but obviously don't use it as the be-all, end-all. Like if you're comparing somebody who's playing 32 minutes a game to somebody who's playing 8, like of course the guy who's playing 8 is going to come out better in per 40. But all these guys are, a limited role coming off the bench in year one. Obviously more so, Flory played more than the other two guys, but it'll get us at least within striking distance. So if we look at per 40 numbers of their freshman seasons, Flory this year, Cole on the 08 championship team, and Doak on the 2017 team before he got hurt. Flory's per 40 numbers, 14.4 points, 13.1 rebounds, 0.8 assists, 1.4 steals, about 4 blocks per game. He averaged 5.5 fouls per 40, and then shot 70% from the floor, 53 from the foul line. Udoka Azubuike, meanwhile, 15.5 points per game per 40, so a little more than Flory, but not much more. 13.5 rebounds, so again, that's within range. 0.6 assists, slightly less there. 0.6 steals, so Flory better at getting steals. Interestingly enough, Doak averaged 5.1 blocks per 40 his freshman year. His career, he finished at 3.4, so he was just on a blocking heater to start his freshman career. But this one's funny. Doak, his freshman year at Kansas, and this is something that I actually find really interesting because one of my big, questions, worries, whatever you want to call it, for Kansas this season with the lack of big men, the lack of bodies they have down low, is what happens if Flory gets in foul trouble, right? We saw Flory get in foul trouble at times this season, and Flory 5.5 fouls per 40 minutes as a freshman. But this is a good reminder. Doak averaged 8.7 fouls per 40 minutes as a freshman, and he wound up being able to figure it out and be okay. So that is encouraging that, Flory can get better at it too. But Doak was 63% on twos, which finished his career at 75%, and then he was only 38% at the foul line. So actually, Flory was better on twos as a freshman than Doak was. Flory is also much better at the free throw line, better at getting steals. Doak was better at blocking shots. Doak fouled too much. And then the rebounds, the assists, the points are all very similar. What about Cole Aldrich? Cole Aldrich's freshman numbers, the per 40 on the 08 championship team, 13.6 points, 14.4 rebounds. So slightly less scoring, slightly more rebounding, 0.6 assists, 1.3 steals. So those numbers very much in line. 4.1 blocks, that number very much in line with the 3.9 for Flory. 5.8 fouls per 40. So, across the board, very even. Again, you're talking Flory essentially 14 and 13 on 1.5 steals and 4 blocks with 5.5 fouls. Cole at about 13.5, 14.5, 1.5 steals, 4 blocks, just under 6 fouls per 40. Very similar per 40 numbers for Cole Aldrich. And that's the one that I actually like the best in terms of player role is the Cole Aldrich one, because I've also been kind of comparing the idea of that team to this year's team. I've said the 2020 team from a roster build perspective is a little bit similar too, but I also think some similarities to the 09 team in terms of, hey, you lost a lot from the year before. Now, obviously, they lost players from a national championship team. This Kansas team lost players from a team who lost in the first round as a 7 seed, so different. But point being, there are a lot of players being asked to play, a bigger role or a new role for KU that weren't on last year's team or are going to be asked to play more on this year's team. And you look at that 09 team for Kansas, Sharon Collins is an All-American guard. That's kind of the expectation for Darren Peterson. Cole Aldrich was an all Big 12, double-double machine at center. That's kind of the expectation for Flory. And then it's like, hey, we're going to surround it with, we've got some interesting, you have a young Tyshawn Taylor, which Melvin Council's been kind of comped to, right? And so you have the younger version of him. So maybe it's a better comp to say that than the version of Tyshawn that ended up being an All-American and a second-round pick in the NBA draft, because I don't know that those are the expectations for Melvin Council. So maybe that's the better comparison there. And then you get some other young players or role players kind of around those guys, And from that perspective, it is kind of similar to this year's team. So I do find that interesting that the numbers are similar there. Now, if he follows Doak's path, year 2, Udoka Azubuike for Kansas, that again was on the Final Four team in 2017-2018. Doak went for 13 points, 7 rebounds per game, 1.7 blocks. That was in 23.6 minutes per game. He dropped his fouls per 40 from 8.7 per 40 to 5.1, and he shot a nation's best 77%. If I told you Flory was going to average 13 and 7, I think the blocks would probably be more than what Doak had there, given that Doak averaged basically the same amount of blocks that Flory did this year as a freshman in 7 more minutes per game. But if I said that Flory averaged 13 and 7 on 70% even, you'd probably take that right now and be happy with it, right? And then maybe you'd want more rebounding, but maybe that just gets, notched into because Kansas has a bunch of other good rebounders. That's certainly a good season from Udoka Azubuike. Now, if he follows Cole Aldrich's path, year 2 for Cole saw him go for 14.9 points, 11.1 rebounds, 2.7 blocks per game. He was down to 3.5 fouls per 40. He shot 60%. Now, this is where I think Cole had a little bit more to his offensive game, so he's being asked to do a little bit more on offense. With Flory, because it is a little bit less, maybe you end up with a better efficiency, but he also probably is a little springier than Cole Aldrich, and so you're going to end up with a higher efficiency number. And I do also think, even though I think there are some, what is the offensive game, what's the repertoire, what is the post game going to look like for Flory this year? I do think it's more than, I think he showed more as a freshman than like we saw as a freshman from like Ernest Uday and Zuby Ejiofor. Like, I'll say that. Like, there were at least moments where he would catch the ball in the block and he would turn, or he would, kind of pivot around to get the angle he needed. Like, there was more. It wasn't Hunter Dickinson. It wasn't the Morris twins. It wasn't, Darrell Arthur. But, like, it wasn't some of those really raw guys we saw right away. So I do think there's more there than you expect. But overall, if Flory has either players sophomore season, Doak or Cole Aldrich, I think KU is going to be happy with that, because I would argue that both Doak and Cole Aldrich were top 10 players in the Big 12. And maybe you could argue they were even better. I mean, Cole putting up 15 and 11, 3 blocks per game. That, I don't know, that might be a top 5 player in the Big 12, right? Part of it is dependent on what's the talent around you. Like that year you have Blake Griffin and some other good players. But Doak, his sophomore season, was 3rd team all Big 12. So that would tell you he's a top 15 player. But also if you go back and look at it, like on the 2nd team was Mo Bamba, which Bamba was getting more blocks per game, and the raw numbers for the rebounds were better. But like, if we're talking who had a bigger impact, and like you look at the efficiency numbers compared between them, you're kind of like, especially it's easier now, because like, Mo Bamba, it was like, oh, but he's the one and done, like he's this special product. And like Mo Bamba hasn't had really a better NBA career than Doak, so realistically, you could argue Doak was a top 10 player in the Big 12 that year. And that was on a loaded KU team. Like, that's part of the thing with awards. It doesn't necessarily indicate who's the most valuable player. It's a good rough draft of it. But like, when you have shots going to Devontae Graham, Malik Newman, Svi Mikhailuk, and LeGerald Vick, if that's not the case, does Doak average 15 and 10 on that team, right? Where he has to do a little bit more on that team. And then you do end up one of those. So I think he's probably a top 10 player. And honestly, like, I think how teams game planned that KU team for the most part, I think a lot of teams, it was like, Devontae's the top guy we got to try to take away. Doak is the second guy we got to take away. And in fact, I remember being certain teams where KU would play where they'd be like, yeah, our primary focus is trying to stop Doak because he's shooting 77% from the floor. Like, that is the primary focus. From a Cole Aldrich perspective, like, he was named to, the top Big 12 teams. So that is the case. And so I think that if you're viewing it from that perspective, can he be a top 10, top 15 player in the Big 12 this season? I think Flory can be, which would be quite the compliment if Darren Peterson is the Sharon Collins, to go back to that 09 reference. If Darren Peterson is that All-American, all Big 12 first team, Big 12 player of the year level guard, that's quite the compliment to have Flory Bidunga. And I think those guys show quite the path for him that I'm expecting him to take in year 2. All right, who else needs to take a big jump for KU? We get to that next. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting tickets to concerts faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And with Game Time, too, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. Just toggle that the fees included button. You also get to see the panoramic seat view, so you know there's no surprise. Maybe you're going to a venue you've never been before. You're like, are these good seats? Am I going to be, blocked by some view somewhere? Well, guess what? The panoramic seat view, you're going to find out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets for concerts, shows, sports, whatever with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for joining us on this show. Don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. We're going to be talking how talented is this KU football roster compared to past rosters. On tomorrow's episode, we're also going to rank every Kansas football game by importance. On Wednesday's show, we'll have our off-ball guards preview coming up on Thursday for more KU basketball. So stick around with us, and we'll get to any breaking news as we see fit as well. So make sure you subscribe to the show. And even if you only listen on the audio side of things, just hit subscribe on YouTube. It doesn't cause you any, it doesn't download anything, it doesn't cause any extra issues for you, but it certainly helps out on our end of things. Okay, who else needs to take a big, leap this year for Kansas besides Flory? I think you could look at, if you're talking about guys coming in, you could talk about certain traits, but it's also a little bit harder because it's okay, you kind of are who you are. It's just about how are you going to fit in and how is Bill Self going to make that work? You can make the argument, though, Melvin Council, could you have a jump in three-point shooting, If you're talking about, a guy like Cole Rosario, could he make a big jump from just, being a more consistent three-point shooter from where he was a season ago? But it's a little bit harder with the guys who are newcomers to the team. Now, could you make the argument for a guy like Bryson Tiller? Right? Does it even count because he didn't get to practice, basically taking a medical red shirt with KU? But if you do count it as can he improve a bunch? Well, that would be certainly helpful for Kansas because it would give them another big man that they can trust. It would give them another body. It would also open up the door to playing two big basketball because Bryson Tiller represents your best opportunity to do that because you can play him at the 4 and he's very skilled to be able to do so on the offensive end of the floor, and it would give you a ton of length and wingspan at your 4 and 5 position. So that would certainly be one that, I'd be open to hearing about. I think Trey White would be somebody that would be open to hearing about because more of kind of a role player on Illinois, and he's going to be a role player in a certain sense for Kansas, but I think that's going to be an even bigger role on this Kansas team than it might have been on Illinois last season. They're going to be asking him to grab and go, to be a really, switchable 4-man, to be somebody who is kind of that jack of all trades and can do a little bit of everything for Kansas and can be their Swiss Army knife and guard a lot of opposing force. But I think there's one obvious answer to this, and that's Elmarko Jackson. Elmarko Jackson needs to take some sort of a jump, and I get it. He was out for, the season last year as well, right? But if we're just talking from his last level of play, he shot 27% from 3, struggled with efficiency, game looked like it was going too fast for him. And I've talked about before, thank you to the Everydayers who already caught the episode, of why I think Elmarko could be in store for that breakout season, why he could have that big season this year where, maybe it's not him earning an all Big 12 performance because there's other guys kind of in front of him, but his impact is felt. His impact is there, and he's able to make that impact enough so that, maybe it's not all Big 12 third team, but value-wise, he's such a key piece to the team and makes you feel like in the future he's going to be the go-to guy, another year from now. But he's kind of the obvious one where it's you're a former McDonald's All-American. You're such a good athlete. You have maybe some potential to at least be a better three-point shooter than you've shown, which would help this team from their three-point shooting perspective. There's just a lot there and a lot to the notion of I think he's going to play. I think Bill Self's going to trust him. He's a good defender. that I think he's the guy that you're like, okay, I think he could, and I think he needs to take a big jump this year. Maybe not as big of a Flory Bidunga sized jump, but at least a big enough one, to be playing 25 plus minutes per night for KU. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And we'll see you next time for another edition of LOJ.